The black sedan pulled into the parking lot of Sterling Auto Gallery, just as the afternoon sun started its descent. David stepped out, stretching his legs after the 4-hour flight. He'd been traveling since dawn, and exhaustion showed in the slight slouch of his shoulders. His jeans were wrinkled, his jacket was casual, and his sneakers had seen better days. Not exactly the image of a successful businessman, but after 12 hours of meetings and airports, comfort had won over style. David looked up at the gleaming glass building before him. This dealership, with its polished floors and rows of luxury vehicles, was now his. Well, technically, it had been his since the papers were signed that morning. But nobody here knew that yet, and that was exactly how he wanted it. He had a theory, one shaped by years in the business world. You never really know how a company operates until you see it when nobody's watching, when the boss isn't around, when there's no corporate visit scheduled, when people think they can just be themselves. That's when the truth comes out. So he'd decided to arrive a day early, unannounced, dressed like any regular person who might wander in off the street. The showroom was impressive. Luxury cars sat under perfectly angled spotlights, their paint jobs gleaming like jewels. The air smelled like leather and that particular scent of newness that only expensive things seem to have. A few customers browsed the floor, their footsteps echoing softly on the marble tiles. Sales staff in crisp suits moved between vehicles, their voices low and professional. David walked slowly past a silver sports car, admiring the curves of its design. He'd always loved cars, even as a kid when owning one seemed like an impossible dream. Now he owned an entire dealership full of them. Life had a funny way of working out sometimes. Can I help you? The voice came from behind him, sharp and cold. David turned to see a man in his 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His name tag read, Robert Mitchell, Sales Manager. His expression wasn't welcoming. Just looking around, David said with a friendly smile. Beautiful cars you've got here. Robert's eyes traveled slowly from David's worn sneakers up to his casual jacket, his lip curling slightly. Looking around, he repeated, his tone making it clear what he thought of that. Sir, these are premium vehicles. The starting price is $70,000. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of our sister locations across town. They handle more budget-friendly options. David felt the familiar tightness in his chest but kept his voice level. I appreciate the suggestion, but I'm fine here. Just browsing. He turned back to the sports car, trying to ignore the way Robert continued to hover behind him. He could feel the man's eyes boring into his back. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He'd expected to walk around, maybe chat with a few employees, get a sense of how the place ran. He hadn't expected this. Sir. Robert's voice was louder now, attracting attention from nearby customers. I'm going to have to ask what your intentions are. We've had issues with people coming in here, wasting our time, taking photos, that sort of thing. David took a slow breath and turned around. I'm not wasting anyone's time. I'm just looking at cars. That's what people do in car dealerships, isn't it? Robert's face hardened. Don't get smart with me. I've been in this business for 15 years. And I know when someone's serious and when someone's just... He paused, looking David up and down again, wandering in from who knows where. A well-dressed couple nearby had stopped their conversation to watch. The woman looked uncomfortable. The man whispered something to her. David noticed a young salesman across the showroom, a kid who couldn't be more than 25, watching the scene with wide eyes but making no move to intervene. I'm a customer, David said quietly. Or at least I'm trying to be. Is there a problem with that? The problem, Robert said, stepping closer, is that you're making my actual customers nervous. Look around. Does it look like you belong here? The words hung in the air like a slap. David had heard variations of this his entire life. In college, when professors assumed he was there on charity. In business meetings where people mistook him for the help. At restaurants where he was seated near the kitchen. At country clubs where membership applications mysteriously got lost. He'd thought that success would shield him from it. That money and achievement would somehow make him immune. But here he was, standing in a dealership he owned, being told he didn't belong. I think, David said carefully, that I have every right to be here, just like anyone else. Robert's jaw clenched. He pulled out his radio. Jim, I need you in the showroom. Now. That's really not necessary, David started, but Robert held up a hand to silence him. I decide what's necessary in my dealership. And right now, what's necessary is for you to leave before this becomes a bigger problem than it needs to be." A security guard appeared from a side hallway, his hand resting on his belt. The young salesman across the room looked like he wanted to say something, but remained frozen in place. The well-dressed couple had moved away, pretending to examine a car in the corner. Everyone was watching, but nobody was helping. David reached for his phone, thinking he'd call his attorney and end this charade right now. But Robert's hand shot out, grabbing his wrist. "Don't even think about it," Robert growled. "Jim, escort this gentleman out. Make sure he doesn't come back." As the security guard approached, David looked around the showroom one last time. Every face told the same story: fear, discomfort, indifference. Not one person was willing to stand up and say that this was wrong. He took a deep breath. "Fine. They wanted to do this the hard way. You're making a mistake," David said quietly as Jim took his arm. Robert laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the showroom. "The only mistake here is yours, buddy. Coming in here thinking you can just walk around like you own the place." David almost smiled at that. "Almost. If you say so," he replied, allowing himself to be guided toward the exit. Behind him, he heard Robert mutter to Jim, "I don't know what these people are thinking sometimes." The nerve. The automatic doors slid open, bright afternoon sunlight spilling across the marble floor. David's phone buzzed in his pocket. Probably his attorney, wondering why he hadn't checked in yet. This was going to be an interesting conversation. David's phone buzzed again as Jim's grip tightened on his arm. He could feel every eye in the showroom watching this humiliating march toward the exit. The marble floor seemed to stretch on forever, each step echoing like a drumbeat announcing his removal. "Look, this is unnecessary," David said calmly to Jim. "I'm happy to leave on my own." Jim's expression was apologetic, but he didn't loosen his grip. "Sorry, man. Just doing what I'm told. Boss says you gotta go, you gotta go." Robert walked behind them, his presence like a shadow. David could hear him speaking into his radio, probably alerting other staff members about the situation. The young salesman David had noticed earlier was now pretending to organize brochures, his hands shaking slightly. A woman at the reception desk stared at her computer screen, refusing to make eye contact. They were almost at the door when David stopped walking. Jim tugged at his arm, but David stood firm. "Before I go," David said, turning to face Robert, "I'd like to know your full name and position. For my records." Robert's face flushed red. "You threatening me?" "That's it. Jim, get him out of here now." "I'm not threatening anyone," David replied evenly. "I'm simply asking for information that's publicly available. Your name tag says Robert Mitchell, sales manager. That's all I needed to know." "You think you're clever?" Robert stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. "You think you can come back here with some lawyer and make trouble? I've dealt with your type before. Nothing's going to come of it. Nothing ever does, your type." The words hung in the air like poison gas. David pulled out his phone slowly, making sure his movements were clear and non-threatening. The last thing he needed was this situation to escalate further, but Robert's hand shot out and grabbed his wrist hard enough to hurt. "What do you think you're doing?" Robert hissed. "Making a phone call," David said, his voice still calm despite the anger building in his chest. "That's not illegal last time I checked. You're recording me, aren't you? Trying to set me up?" Robert's grip tightened. "I've seen this before. People like you come in here looking for a confrontation, hoping someone will give you a reason to sue." "People like me," David repeated quietly. "What exactly do you mean by that?" The showroom had gone completely silent. Even the soft background music seemed to have stopped. The well-dressed couple from earlier had moved toward the exit, clearly uncomfortable with the scene. But several other customers had pulled out their own phones. In today's world, everything was recorded. Everything went viral. Robert should have known that, but anger had apparently clouded his judgment. "You know exactly what I mean," Robert said. "Don't play innocent. You came in here dressed like that, acting suspicious, and now you're trying to make this into something it's not." David looked down at his clothes. Jeans, a jacket, sneakers. The same outfit thousands of people wore every day. The same outfit he'd seen on at least 3 other people in this very showroom when he'd first walked in. But somehow on him it was suspicious. "Let go of my arm," David said softly. "Or what?" Robert challenged. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Jim looked increasingly uncomfortable, his eyes darting between David and Robert. The young salesman had abandoned all pretense of working and was openly staring now. The receptionist had finally looked up from her computer, her hand hovering over the phone on her desk. "Robert." A woman's voice cut through the silence. It was the receptionist. "Maybe we should just let him leave peacefully. This is getting out of hand." "Stay out of this, Helen," Robert snapped without looking at her. "I'm handling it." "You're not handling anything," David said. "You're assaulting me. That's what this is called when you grab someone against their will." Robert's eyes widened and he immediately released David's arm, but the damage was done. Half a dozen phones were now pointed at them, recording everything. Robert seemed to realize this all at once, and his expression shifted from anger to something close to panic. "I didn't assault anyone," he said quickly, looking at the cameras. "I was just trying to maintain order in my establishment." "This man was trespassing." "Trespassing?" David almost laughed. "In a public business? During business hours? That's an interesting interpretation of the law. You were asked to leave and you refused. That's trespassing." Robert was backpedaling now, trying to construct a narrative that would justify his actions. "I was in the process of leaving," David corrected. "Voluntarily, I might add, until you decided to put your hands on me." Jim had stepped back, clearly wanting no part of whatever this was turning into. Helen was speaking quietly into her desk phone, probably calling corporate. The young salesman had finally found his courage and was walking over, though he looked terrified. "Mr. Mitchell," the young man said, his voice shaking slightly. "Maybe we should just let him go. This doesn't feel right." Robert rounded on him with such fury that the young man actually stepped back. "Did I ask for your opinion, Tyler? Get back to work before you're looking for a new job." Tyler's face went pale, but something in his eyes had hardened. "With all due respect, sir, I don't think the owner would approve of how this is being handled." "The owner isn't here," Robert shot back. "I'm in charge, and when I give you an order, you follow it. Is that clear?" David watched this exchange with interest. So Tyler knew the owner, or at least knew of him. That was going to make things interesting. "Crystal clear," Tyler said quietly, but he didn't move away. Instead, he looked at David. "Sir, I apologize for this. This isn't how we normally treat people, isn't it?" David asked, genuinely curious. "Has this happened before?" Tyler's silence was answer enough. Robert's face had gone from red to almost purple. "That's it," Robert said. "Tyler, you're suspended. 2 weeks, no pay. Jim, I want this man escorted off the property immediately, and if he resists, call the police." David's phone buzzed again, then again. Multiple messages coming through. He glanced at the screen and saw his attorney's name, along with several others. They were arriving. "Finally. Go ahead," David said calmly. "Call the police. I'd actually welcome that right now." Robert pulled out his own phone, his hands shaking with rage. "You want the police? Fine. Let's see how tough you are when they show up." "I'm counting on it," David replied. As Robert made his call, David caught Tyler's eye and gave him a small nod of appreciation. The young man had risked his job to speak up. That took courage. That was the kind of employee worth keeping. Through the showroom's glass walls, David could see a car pulling into the parking lot. Fast. Too fast for a customer. His phone buzzed one more time, and this time he looked at it. The message was simple. "We're here. Hold on." David slipped his phone back into his pocket and smiled. Robert was still on his call with the police, describing a suspicious individual who was refusing to leave and threatening staff members. Every word was being recorded by multiple phones. Every lie was being documented. The car outside screeched to a halt. Doors opened. David recognized the woman who stepped out first. His attorney, Patricia, looking absolutely furious. Behind her came 2 other people in business suits, along with someone David definitely hadn't expected to see today. This was about to get very interesting. "Officer," Robert was saying into his phone. "Yes, he's still here. We're holding him in the showroom. Please hurry." David looked at him with something close to pity. "Robert, I really tried to tell you. You're making a terrible mistake. The only mistake was you walking in here," Robert replied. The showroom doors burst open, and everything changed. Patricia, Chen moved through the showroom like a force of nature. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor, and the leather briefcase in her hand swung with each purposeful step. Behind her, 2 executives in dark suits followed. along with a man David recognized as his business partner, Carlos. "Stop." Patricia's voice cut through the showroom like a knife. "Everyone stop exactly what you're doing." Robert looked up from his phone, confusion crossing his face. Jim's hand dropped from David's arm as if he'd been burned. The customers with their phones kept recording, sensing that whatever was happening was far from over. "Who are you?" Robert demanded, trying to regain his authority. "This is private property and I'm handling a situation here." Patricia ignored him completely and walked straight to David. "Mr. Chen, are you all right? Did anyone hurt you?" David rubbed his wrist where Robert had grabbed him. "I'm fine, Patricia. Just a misunderstanding, apparently." "A misunderstanding," she repeated, her voice dripping with barely controlled fury. She turned to face Robert, and her expression could have frozen fire. "You. Name and position, now." Robert drew himself up to his full height, clearly offended by her tone. "I'm Robert Mitchell, sales manager of this dealership. And I don't know who you think you are, but you can't just storm in here and start giving orders. Can I?" Patricia opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder thick with documents. "I'm Patricia Chen, senior corporate attorney for the investment group that owns this dealership, or rather, that owned it until 8 o'clock this morning." The color started to drain from Robert's face. "At 8 o'clock this morning," Patricia continued, her voice loud enough for everyone in the showroom to hear. "Ownership of Sterling Auto Gallery, along with all 6 locations in this region, transferred to new management. The papers were filed. The money was transferred. Everything is legal and binding." Robert's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Helen, the receptionist, had stood up from her desk, her hand covering her mouth. Tyler looked confused but hopeful. The customers had stopped even pretending to look at cars now. Everyone was watching. Carlos stepped forward, pulling out his phone and turning it to show the screen. On it was a professional photo of David, wearing a suit, standing in front of a corporate logo. "This is the new owner," Carlos said calmly. "David Chen, perhaps you recognize him now?" The silence that followed was deafening. Robert stared at the phone, then at David, then back at the phone. His face went through several shades of color, finally settling on a sickly gray. That's not possible," Robert stammered. "He can't be. I mean, he's dressed like what?" Patricia interrupted sharply. "Please finish that sentence. I'm very interested in hearing how you complete it." Robert's mouth snapped shut. David stepped forward, adjusting his jacket with as much dignity as he could muster after being manhandled. "I arrived early and unannounced because I wanted to see how this dealership operates when nobody's watching. When there's no corporate visit scheduled. When people think they can be themselves." He looked around the showroom, making eye contact with each person present. Helen looked mortified. Jim looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Tyler looked vindicated. The customers looked shocked. And Robert looked like his entire world was crumbling. "What I found," David continued, his voice steady and clear, "was deeply disappointing. I was profiled from the moment I walked in. I was treated with suspicion and hostility. I was physically grabbed and escorted toward the exit. And all of this happened because of how I looked and what I was wearing." "Mr. Chen, I can explain," Robert started, his voice desperate now. "I was just trying to protect the dealership. We've had problems before with people who what?" David interrupted. "Who don't look wealthy enough. Who don't dress the right way. Who don't fit your idea of what a customer should look like." Robert tried again. "I was doing my job. Security is part of my responsibility. I couldn't have known you were the owner." "You couldn't have known I was the owner," David agreed. "But you should have known I was a human being who deserved basic respect. You should have known that you don't judge people by their clothes or their appearance. You should have known that every person who walks through that door deserves to be treated with dignity." Patricia stepped forward with another document. "Mr. Mitchell, I've been reviewing the files during the due diligence process for this acquisition. This isn't the first complaint we've received about you. In fact, there are 7 documented incidents over the past 2 years of customers reporting discriminatory treatment." Robert's eyes widened. Those were all misunderstandings. People get offended over nothing these days. 7 people, Patricia said coldly. 7 different incidents. All with the same pattern. All dismissed by previous management as misunderstandings. She turned to David. The former owner didn't take them seriously. He thought they were just complaints from people looking for trouble. David felt his jaw tighten. This was exactly why he'd wanted to visit unannounced. This was exactly the kind of problem that festered when leadership didn't care. When profit mattered more than people. When it was easier to ignore problems than to fix them. There's something else, Patricia continued, flipping through her documents. 3 former employees filed complaints with HR about creating a hostile work environment. 2 of them specifically mentioned you, Mr. Mitchell. Tyler spoke up suddenly, his voice stronger now. He threatened to fire me 5 minutes ago just for suggesting we let Mr. Chen leave peacefully. Robert spun on him. You should keep your mouth shut if you want to keep your job. Actually, David said quietly, that's not your decision to make anymore. The weight of those words settled over the showroom like snow. Robert's face went through another series of expressions. Anger, denial, fear, and finally a desperate kind of hope. Mr. Chen, please, Robert said, and now his voice was pleading. I made a mistake. I see that now. But I've been with this dealership for 15 years. I've generated millions in sales. I know this business inside and out. Surely we can work past this. David looked at him for a long moment. He thought about every time someone had judged him unfairly. Every door that had been closed in his face. Every opportunity he'd had to fight twice as hard for because people made assumptions. He thought about the 7 other people who had walked into this dealership and been treated the same way. He thought about the employees who had been intimidated into silence. You're right about one thing, David said finally. You do know this business. You know how to sell cars. You know how to manage a sales floor. But what you don't know, what you've never understood, is that this business is about people. Every single person who walks through that door is a potential customer, regardless of what they look like or how they're dressed. I can change, Robert said quickly. I can do better. Just give me a chance, David shook his head slowly. You've had 15 years of chances, 7 documented complaints, 3 HR violations, and today, you physically assaulted the new owner. But more than that, when given the opportunity to de-escalate, you doubled down. When Tyler tried to intervene, you threatened him. When Helen suggested letting me leave peacefully, you dismissed her. You've shown me exactly who you are. Carlos stepped forward with a final document. Mr. Mitchell, your employment with Sterling Auto Gallery is terminated effective immediately. You'll be escorted from the premises and given information about your final paycheck and benefits. Security will inventory your office while you're present. Robert's face crumpled. You can't do this. I'll sue. I'll fight this. You're welcome to try, Patricia said calmly. But I should inform you that we have multiple video recordings of today's incident, along with a documented history of complaints. I'd strongly advise you to speak with an attorney before taking any action. Jim stepped forward, looking uncomfortable but professional. Mr. Mitchell, I'll need you to come with me. As Robert was led toward the back offices, he turned back one last time. This isn't fair. I was just doing what I thought was right. David watched him go, feeling not triumph but a deep sadness. That's the problem, he said quietly. You really believe that? The showroom doors closed behind them, and for a moment nobody moved. Then Helen started crying softly at her desk. Tyler stood frozen, as if afraid that moving might break whatever spell had just been cast. The customers slowly began to filter out, still recording, still whispering. David took a deep breath and looked around his new dealership. This wasn't how he'd imagined his first day, but maybe, just maybe, it was exactly what needed to happen. The showroom felt different now. Quieter somehow despite the whispered conversations and the soft hum of the air conditioning. David stood in the center of it all, still in his wrinkled jeans and casual jacket, looking at the faces of the employees gathered around him. Patricia had left with Carlos to handle the paperwork for Robert's termination. The customers had all gone, no doubt racing to post their videos online. It was just David and the staff now. Helen at her desk, still dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Tyler standing near the sports cars, his arms crossed like he was trying to hold himself together. Jim had returned from escorting Robert out and was standing by the door looking uncertain. And there were others too. 6 more salespeople who had emerged from various corners of the dealership, all wearing the same expression of worry and shame. I suppose you're all wondering what happens now, David said, breaking the silence. Nobody answered. A few people nodded. Tyler cleared his throat but didn't speak. David walked over to one of the leather couches in the customer waiting area and sat down. He was exhausted, not just from the travel or from the confrontation, but from years of carrying the weight of moments like this. He gestured to the chairs and couches around him. "Sit down, please, let's talk." Slowly, hesitantly, the staff members moved closer. Helen came out from behind her desk. Tyler sat on the arm of a chair. The others found seats or stood nearby. Jim remained by the door, looking like he might bolt at any moment. "First," David said, looking at each person in turn, "I want you to know that I'm not here to clean house. I'm not going to fire everyone and start over. That's not what this is about." He could see the relief on some faces, but the tension didn't completely disappear. What happened today with Robert was extreme, yes, but it was also revealing, and I need to understand how things got to this point. David leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "I've been reading through the files, the complaints, the HR reports, and what I keep wondering is, where was everyone else? When those 7 customers were treated poorly, where were the rest of you?" The silence was heavy. A woman in her 30s, her name tag reading Michelle, spoke up quietly. "We saw things. Not all of it, but some of it. Robert had a way of... He could be difficult." "Difficult," David repeated. "That's one word for it." Tyler suddenly stood up. "I tried to say something once. About 6 months ago. A customer came in, an older Hispanic man, and Robert treated him almost the same way he treated you today. Not as bad, but the same attitude, the same assumptions. I went to the previous owner and told him what I saw." "And what happened?" David asked. "Nothing," Tyler said bitterly. "He told me that Robert was his top sales manager, that he brought in more money than anyone else, and that I should focus on my own numbers instead of causing problems." Helen spoke up from her seat. "Robert knew he was protected. We all knew it. He made the dealership money, so nothing else mattered." David felt his chest tighten with familiar anger. This was the story he'd heard too many times before. In too many companies, in too many industries. Good people staying silent because they felt powerless. Bad behavior being tolerated because it was profitable. "Jim," David called out, and the security guard straightened up. "You looked uncomfortable today. Tell me what you were thinking." Jim shifted his weight from foot to foot. "Honestly, sir, I thought the whole thing was wrong from the start. But Robert's my boss. Was my boss, and I got a family to feed. Bills to pay. I couldn't risk my job by questioning him." "Did he ask you to remove people before?" David asked. Jim nodded slowly. "A few times. Usually he said they were solicitors or that they were bothering customers. I never thought about it much. I just did what I was told." A younger salesman, probably in his late 20s, raised his hand tentatively like he was in school. "Mr. Chen, can I ask you something?" "Of course. And just call me David. Why did you come in dressed like that? I mean, if you wanted to observe the dealership, why not just announce yourself properly?" David smiled sadly. "Because this is how I actually dress when I'm not in meetings. These are my comfortable clothes. And I wanted to see how people would treat me when I looked like this, when I looked like just another person walking in off the street." "And we failed the test," Michelle said quietly. "Some of you did," David agreed. "But Tyler didn't. He tried to speak up today. He risked his job to suggest that what was happening was wrong. And Helen, you tried to de-escalate the situation. Those actions matter." Tyler looked down at his feet. "I should have done more. I should have done it sooner." "Maybe," David said. "But you did something. That's more than most people manage." He stood up and walked over to the large window overlooking the parking lot. The sun was getting lower now, casting long shadows across the rows of shiny cars. He could see his reflection in the glass. Still in his casual clothes. Still looking nothing like what most people expected a dealership owner to look like. "I grew up in a neighborhood where nobody owned cars like the ones we sell here," David said, his back still to the group. "My mom cleaned houses. My dad worked construction when he could find work. We took the bus everywhere. Sometimes we walked because we couldn't afford the bus fare." He turned back to face them. "When I was 16, I got a job at a fast food place. Saved every penny. And when I finally had enough, I went to a car dealership to buy my first car. Nothing fancy. Just a used sedan that would get me to work and back. The salesman took one look at me and told me they didn't have anything in my price range. He didn't ask what my price range was. He just assumed." Michelle wiped at her eyes. Several others were looking down at their hands. "I ended up buying a car somewhere else," David continued, "from a salesman who actually listened to me, who treated me like a real customer. And I never forgot that feeling. The difference between being dismissed and being respected. That's why I'm here. That's why I bought this dealership. Because I want every person who walks through those doors to feel like they matter. We can do better, Tyler said firmly. I want to do better. Me too, Helen added. All of us, Michelle said, and several other voices echoed her. David nodded. Good, because here's what's going to happen. Starting next week, everyone in this dealership is going through training. Real training, not just watching a video and signing a form. We're going to learn about unconscious bias, about treating people with dignity, about building a culture where speaking up is rewarded, not punished. And if people don't want to change, Jim asked, then they can find work elsewhere, David said simply. This is non-negotiable. The culture here is going to change, starting now, but I need all of you to be part of that change. I can't do it alone. He looked at Tyler. You're no longer suspended. In fact, I want you to think about moving into management. We need leaders who aren't afraid to do the right thing. Tyler's eyes widened. Sir, Thank you. I won't let you down. I know you won't. David looked at Helen. You've been here a long time, haven't you? 12 years, she said. Then you know how things used to work, and you can help me understand what needs to change. I'm going to need honest feedback from people who know this place. Helen straightened in her chair, something like pride crossing her face. I can do that. David addressed the whole group again. I'm not going to pretend that what happened today doesn't matter. It matters tremendously. But what matters even more is what we do next. We can either let this moment break us or we can let it transform us. The choice is ours. What about the videos? Michelle asked nervously. The ones people took. They're probably already online. David had thought about that. Let them post. Let the world see what happened, and then let them see how we respond. Let them see us become better. As the meeting broke up and people returned to their stations, Tyler approached David. Thank you for giving us another chance. Thank you for speaking up, David replied. That took courage. Not enough courage, Tyler said. Not soon enough. Then make up for it now, David told him. Help me build something better here. Tyler nodded, determination in his eyes. I will. I promise. As David watched him walk away, he felt the exhaustion creeping back in. It was going to be a long road ahead. Changing a culture never happened overnight. But for the first time since walking into this showroom, he felt something like hope. His phone buzzed. Patricia, asking if he needed anything else today. He smiled and texted back. Just a good night's sleep. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. 6 months had passed since that afternoon in the showroom. David stood in the same spot where Robert had grabbed his arm, but everything felt different now. The space looked the same. Same marble floors, same luxury cars, same glass walls letting in the afternoon sun, but the energy had completely changed. Mr. Chen, your 3 o'clock is here, Helen called from the reception desk. She was smiling now, something David had rarely seen in those first few weeks. Thanks, Helen. Send them to the conference room. I'll be right there. David adjusted his tie. He was wearing a suit today, though he'd made it a point over the past months to dress casually at least once a week, just to remind everyone, including himself, that respect wasn't about clothing. Several customers had recognized him from the viral videos and had come in specifically because of what had happened, some to show support, others just curious to see if the place had really changed. The videos had spread faster than anyone expected. Within 24 hours, footage of David being removed from his own dealership was everywhere. News outlets picked it up. Social media exploded with opinions. The dealership's phone had rung nonstop for days. Some of the calls were angry, people demanding refunds on cars they'd bought years ago. Others were supportive, and a few were heartbreaking. People sharing their own stories of being judged, dismissed, or mistreated because of how they looked. David had read every email personally, responded to as many calls as he could, and most importantly, he'd listened. The conference room was already full when he arrived. Tyler sat at the table, now officially the new sales manager. Next to him was Michelle, who'd been promoted to training coordinator. Helen had moved from reception to customer experience director. Jim was there too, along with several other staff members. And across from them sat 3 people David had personally reached out to, 3 of the 7 customers who had filed complaints about Robert over the years. Thank you all for coming, David said as he took his seat. I know this isn't easy. Some of you haven't been back here since the incidents, but I wanted you to see what we've been building. An older woman named Catherine spoke first. She was in her 60s, dressed elegantly, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. "I'll be honest, Mr. Chen. When you called me, I almost didn't answer. I'd written this place off completely." "I don't blame you," David said. "What happened to you shouldn't have happened to anyone." "Robert told me I must be in the wrong place," Catherine continued, her voice steady but tinged with old hurt. "Said I looked like I was looking for the bus stop. I'd come in to buy a car for my grandson's graduation. I have the money. I've always had the money. But he took one look at me and decided I didn't belong." Tyler spoke up, his voice thick with regret. "Mrs. Patterson, I was here that day. I saw what happened and I didn't say anything. I've thought about it every day since." "I'm so sorry," Catherine looked at him for a long moment. "You're the young man who tried to help Mr. Chen, aren't you? I saw you in the video." "Yes, ma'am." "Better late than never, I suppose," she said. And there was something softer in her voice now. The second person, a young man named Kevin, leaned forward. He couldn't have been more than 25. "I came in here 2 years ago with my dad. He'd saved up his whole life to buy himself a nice car for his retirement. Robert took one look at us and started showing us the cheapest models in the lot. Wouldn't even let us test drive anything else." "Where did you end up buying from?" David asked. "Miller's Auto across town. The salesman there treated my dad like a king. We spent $45,000 there. Would have spent it here if we'd been given the chance." David nodded, making notes. "Miller's has great people. I've actually been in conversation with their owner about sharing best practices." The third person, a woman named Lisa, had been quiet until now. She was younger, maybe in her 30s, and she kept twisting her hands in her lap. "My incident wasn't as dramatic as the others. Robert didn't kick me out. He just ignored me. I stood in the showroom for 20 minutes while he helped other people. When I finally got his attention, he was dismissive, condescending, made me feel small." "That's just as bad," Michelle said firmly. "Maybe worse because it's easier to dismiss. Easier to say it didn't really happen." "Exactly," Lisa said, looking relieved that someone understood. "My friends told me I was being too sensitive. That maybe he was just busy. But I knew. You always know when someone's treating you differently." David let the silence sit for a moment before speaking. "The reason I asked you all here is because I need your help. We've made changes. Real changes. New training programs, new policies, new leadership. But I need to know if it's enough. I need people who've experienced the worst of this place to tell me if we're doing better." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "You want us to what, test you?" "Essentially, yes," David said. "I want you to come back, shop here, experience the new culture, and then tell me honestly what you think. If we're still failing, I need to know. And if we're succeeding, other people need to hear it from someone other than me." Kevin laughed, a short burst of surprise. "That's either really brave or really stupid. Probably both," David admitted with a smile. Over the next hour, they talked, really talked, about what had happened to each of them. About the changes David had implemented. About the training sessions where staff members had shared their own biases and blind spots. About the new hiring practices that emphasized diversity and inclusion. About the community partnerships David had formed with local organizations. Helen described how they'd created a feedback system where customers could rate their experience anonymously. Tyler explained the monthly meetings where staff discussed challenges and learned from mistakes. Michelle walked them through the training program, which included scenarios and role-playing exercises. "And what happened to Robert?" Catherine asked. David had expected this question. "He's no longer in the automotive industry. I heard he moved to a different state. We didn't part on good terms, but I hope he learned something from the experience." "Do you really believe people can change?" Lisa asked. "I have to," David said. "Otherwise, what's the point of any of this? Yes, some people are set in their ways. But I've seen the staff here transform. I've seen them confront their own prejudices and do better. If they can change, anyone can." At the end of the meeting, all 3 former customers agreed to give the dealership another chance.
Catherine Evie,